G'day and welcome to the Drive Able podcast, where we discuss all things about driving and safer community transport for people with disabilities and medical conditions. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe to our channel and follow us on our socials. Just search for Drive Able Podcast. We have heaps of content now and interviews are continuing almost every week, so go back and listen to our old episodes.
This is another exciting episode. Hey everybody, in this episode we speak with Brian Fitzpatrick. So Brian has a really interesting story. I actually know Brian personally as well. He's got a condition that has progressed over the years and he's had to basically adapt his life and aids to suit, including his car. So that's going to be really interesting to understand, I guess, when those points have been and how he processed them. He's also old school. He's been around well before the NDIS days. So he's got a lot of perspective of before and after. And on top of that, he's also the national sales manager for Mobility Plus, in Melbourne, who's a local wheelchair manufacturer, and they're also a vehicle modifier. So he's got all the angles of what we're going to be needing, I'm sure he's going to have a lot of info, a lot of content, a lot of great value for us. So yeah, what do you reckon, Brad?
Oh, this is going to be a good one. He's got so much to share, so let's get him on.
Let's get in.
Driving is something many take for granted, but when someone has altered ability, then driving or getting out and about in your own car can be challenging. Driving with a disability doesn't mean you have to drive an old clapped out car with farm-like machinery, and relying on a wheelchair doesn't mean waiting for hours and then being in the back of a maxi access cab getting car sick. The Drivable podcast is designed to introduce and explore driving aids for people with disabilities, vehicle modifications, the NDIS, research, medical guidelines, driving techniques, and much, much more. The Drivable podcast is to help you be informed and be in control of your own independence so you can experience freedom through driving safely and reliably. I'm Ali, and with me is Brad, and together we have over 30 years of experience in disability and driving. Enough of the intros, let's get into it.
Okay, in this episode we are talking with Brian Fitzpatrick. Thank you for joining us, Brian. Let's kick off first by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your disability, what it actually is, and we can go from there.
All right, thanks, Ali. Thanks, Brad. Pleasure to be here this morning as part of your video sessions. So I'd hate to admit it, but 59 years ago, I was diagnosed at birth with the condition called Spina Bifida. It was quite prominent back around that era. There are less babies now being born today with spina bifida because of the females taking folate in the first trimester. They're finding that reduces the risk of having babies with spina bifida. So essentially, spina bifida is what they call a neural tube defect, whereas in that the first semester, the spine and spinal cord doesn't form properly. So most people with spina bifida are born into a wheelchair because their paralysis is directly affected. They can also have bowel, bladder issues and things like that. Worst case scenario also is they can have what they call hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain, where a shunt is inserted into the brain to drain that excess fluid away. So fortunately, I didn't have hydrocephalus. I have a very, what you would call a mild case of spina bifida in that regard. So actually, I wasn't born into a wheelchair. Whilst diagnosed at birth with the condition, I didn't have any symptoms at all. So my condition was quite rare compared to other people with spina bifida. So whilst being diagnosed at birth, I had the lump on my back, which is quite common. And that was removed surgically when I was 12 months old. But it was done more for cosmetic reasons than anything else, in that there was just this lump about the size of my fist on the base of my spine. So spina bifida is around the L4, L5 area, so it's quite low, hence why it's more legs, bladder, bowel, certainly not upper body. Mm-hmm. 12 months old, it was removed. And then I, lived a normal childhood, went to a mainstream school, played sports, did all the usual stuff, could run, could do the whole lot.
Okay.
At the age of 12, like most kids, I had a growth spurt. And because I had that spinal cord defect, the spinal cord became tethered. So I lost the sensory feeling from my knees down. And I was starting to get pain in my calves and things like that. So I was having regular visits to the Children's Hospital in that first 12 years, just meeting with my neuro people and orthopedic people, just checking to see what my progress was. But it wasn't picked up until, when I was 12, when I was getting some pain in my legs, that during the tests that they ran, they found that, I'd lost sensory feeling. So
Did you have, sorry to interrupt, so you had zero negative impact on your body until 12, is that right?
Correct. Yeah, that was the start of it.
Yeah, okay.
So from the age of 12, that's when things really start to change.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah,
and
okay.
ironically, the changes that I've experienced have been in 8 to 10 year cycles. So when I go through this timeline, you'll understand what I mean. So at the age of 12, they did what they call a laminectomy, which is open up the back and untether the spinal cord. Okay. So they performed that operation then. Life went on. The pain went away, and I got through until I was 20 years of age. And I slowly developed what they call a drop foot on my left. So over a period of time, my foot just started to drop and I couldn't control pulling it back up at 90 degrees. And it wasn't something that just happened overnight. It was a really gradual thing. So I learned to walk by compensating for that by just lifting my foot up, because I couldn't heel toe properly. Until people sort of noticed that. And then when I went to saw the neuro people again, they said, well, obviously something's going on here. So they did another MRI and found the spinal cord had become tethered again. So they did a laminectomy at 20, free up the spinal cord. It didn't fix the drop foot, that remained. So the muscle wastage there had already occurred. So I started wearing what they call an AFO, which is an orthotic device that goes into the shoe and holds my foot at 90 degrees. Because I was still walking at that point. I was fine then. At that stage, I'd finished all my schooling. I started my career as a motor mechanic.
Were you driving?
Sorry?
Were you driving?
Yes. Yep.
Manuals?
Driving using my feet. Yep. Normal pedals. Yep.
Yeah. Driving a manual
Automatic
car
or
as
manual?
well with a clutch.
Could do both.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. Drove both.
Yep.
Did you start driving at 16? And was there any kind of special thing around that, or just standard kind of, part of the normal, everyone else getting their license?
It was normal. So yeah. Because the symptoms really didn't kick in until I was 20. So, and I got my license right on 18. So I still had full mobility at that stage.
Yeah.
I didn't have to worry about any devices as such. So.
All right. So what happened then? So you're 20, and where do we go to from there?
At 28, then the right foot started to drop. So same deal again. So 8 years on from the last one, the right foot was affected. Same thing, did an MRI, found the spinal cord was tethered again, and did another laminectomy, and freed up that spinal cord. And then I continued on. I started then wearing an AFO on the right as well. So I was wearing two. So,
okay. So
still being able to drive at that
the 28-year-old laminectomy didn't fix the foot drop then. So you still had the AFO on the right at that point, yeah? Yep. And you were driving with an AFO on the pedals at that point?
I was, yeah. So even still today, I've still got the ability to push my foot forward. I just can't pull it up. Okay. So what I did was, with regards to the car was, and Ali, you'd be well aware of this, that in most situations, the accelerator is slightly lower than the brake pedal. You've got to lift your foot up to reach it. So I padded out the accelerator pedal so it was at the same level as the brake. That way I could just go straight across from one side to the other. So, because I still had full movement that way. The only movement I didn't have was being able to pull my foot back. But with the AFO supporting it, I could still push forward.
This is after 28?
Yep.
Yeah. And then what about your job as the mechanic? Was that being affected as well? Yeah,
look, as time went on, it was harder on the tools. So I got off the tools and went into various sales roles in the automotive industry, and spent my working life in the automotive industry up until 8 years ago. So
you're always kind of into cars then?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, bit of a car fan. So I love technical stuff. So yeah, I'm all over that. So yeah, I didn't want to move out of the industry. So whilst I couldn't, work on the tools anymore, I went into various sales roles. Like I said, and did that up until 8 years ago. So,
okay. So then from 28 onwards, you said you were moving in 8 to 10 year cycles. Was that again similar kind of thing?
Yeah, sure was. So mid-30s, the bladder gave out. So that stopped functioning properly. So I had to start doing other things to void. So, and that started at mid-30s, and I still do that today. So, so no more surgery though, because after now having 4 laminectomies, there's that much scar tissue there. As my neurosurgeon said, I don't know what I'm really cutting through and where your nerves are. It's just the risk is too great. So, mid-30s was the bladder. Then mid-40s was when the mobility really started to be affected. So, because I was still walking through that whole period. Mind you, my walking was deteriorating, and I was walking with a real limp. So my gait wasn't great at all. And in doing that, I actually wore out my right hip, and I had to have a total hip replacement in 2009. So, and again, it was just getting harder and harder to walk. I couldn't stand for long periods. And that was my turning point then to go to a wheelchair. And it was at the same time then that I also went to hand controls in the car.
Yeah, okay. So that was what, like about 12 years ago?
Yeah, correct.
But you had a good 12 year stint or something like that where you were driving with your AFO on the accelerator and the brake.
Yep. Yeah, correct.
Through that period, did you have to do anything about your license? You're in Victoria, so the Vic Roads aspect of it all, a little bit different to RMS in New South Wales where Ali is, and Department of Transport here in South Australia. What were the requirements with Vic Roads through that journey?
So it was interesting. It was during that period where you could take your car to a converter and have it converted, and they could do that without having seen whether you've been to Vic Roads or had your license tested or done any of that. So it was really, the onus was on the driver then to do that sort of thing. That's changed dramatically now with NDIS being involved. I can't really talk on behalf of TAC what the situation was there for people like myself, but certainly for NDIS, and now that you've got OTs involved, there's a process to go through to drive with hand controls. So,
but did you have to go through any processes?
I did. So initially when I went straight to the Monarchs, I had those put in and was driving with those. It wasn't until then I changed those to e-radials, to an electronic version of the Monarchs. And obviously I was going for NDIS funding to do that. And this was a really weird experience because the OT that I was using, she obviously did the right thing in dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And not only did I have to go for driving lessons, I had to sit my license again. Now, even though I had been driving with sort of Monarchs up until then for a couple of years, it was then when I changed to e-radials that she said, well, although you've been driving with Monarchs, I need to see you driving with this new version of that. So.
That's interesting. Is that, just to interject a little bit, because as we said, I'm in New South Wales, and there is sort of a bit of a little bit of controversy at the moment with a similar situation where New South Wales government is having a tussle with the industry. So they're turning around and saying, if you change your hand controls or if you get funding or whatever, you need to get this assessment. And then there are people that are like yourself that have been driving their whole lives. There's a bit of a pushback from them saying, well, we've been doing this our whole lives. This is kind of a bit derogatory. And I guess, how did you feel about that aspect of it? What do you think?
Look, like I said, I was a bit taken back by it. And I must admit, from the age of 18, when I first got my license, to then sort of mid-40s, having to reset it again. I didn't have any concerns about it, but it was more just within that week, I did a lesson on the Monday, the Wednesday, and then I set my license on the Friday. And the lesson was with an actual driving instructor. So he was doing it to the letter of the law, as you would expect. So it was, we were in and out of all times at 3 p.m. when school crossings were out. So it was, making sure you drop down to 40 Ks and doing all the right things. And he took me into a shopping centre car park, and I had to park the car and whatnot. So Yeah, did all that. Yeah, passed it. Yeah, first go, so
Yeah, okay.
there wasn't an issue there. But yeah, it was a bit of a weird experience having to do it again after all this time.
Especially seeing you'd already been driving with them with hand controls for quite a long time, but it just wasn't a process for you to actually have that as a restriction on your license at that point, at any point up until that point. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Unreal. Yeah, well, it's certainly, we're having a bit of an issue right now in South Australia where the Department of Transport here have formalised that portable hand controls are no longer an appropriate mode of using hand controls. And there's a whole series of clients that with spinal cord injuries that have purchased portable hand controls, and it's they're having to now go through exactly what you described, reassessments and so forth to and they've been driving with hand controls for years and years and years, and even portable hand controls. So there's a big thing happening at the moment, and it'll be the same for many people as the departments of transport, the Vic Roads, RMS, whatever it is in the state that you are catch up with technology and change their requirements based on technology and how the area is advancing. Yeah.
Sure. And also with NDIS, you're going to find there's a lot more of these products out and available and on the roads. So the governments now need to pay a bit more attention to it and ask a lot more questions. So that's just what it is then, and figure out how to deal with it so everybody's safe. So, and I guess on that note of the NDIS, with the pre-NDIS days, Brian, in terms of getting to those next levels where you needed those aids or whatever it was, what was the kind of support that you needed at that time and got, or from a both funding point of view and an infrastructure point of view? Like, I guess nowadays it seems to be pretty standard with NDIS. There's a process. You go and see OTs, you go and see modifiers, et cetera, and go through paperwork. But was that a bit harder to wade through, or like how did it work out at those times?
Look, I found that my experience was pretty good with it in that, I suppose, because I can articulate fairly well and represent myself. So I still self-manage my NDIS plan even today, and I'm 4 years in. So look, I sort of flew under the radar because I was still working full time and funding a lot of the stuff during that journey myself with AFOs that I needed and things like that. I never went to sweat for that money. When I had to go to catheters, they helped me a bit with that, but that was about all. So look, for me, NDIS has been a fantastic thing. So it's provided me funding to upgrade my hand controls, also put a Caroli 40 into the back of my car as well to lift my chair in and out, and do things of that nature, sports chairs, because I play wheelchair sports. So from that point of view, yeah, it was pretty good. So in my very first year on NDIS, there was quite a lot of AT stuff that I did need as far as vehicle mod work was concerned. A wheelchair, a sports chair, commode, all the usual things. And I went pretty hard at it in that first year. Like many people experienced then, or still experiencing today, it can be a fairly lengthy process. I did engage my local member to advocate on my behalf to NDIA because I thought things were just taking too long in that first year. Once I got involved, yeah, things turned around pretty quickly. And to NDIS's credit, and also to the credit of my local member, I got all the AT that I asked for in the very first year. So that set me up then, and has set me up for quite a while. So
in terms of getting the AT, so with NDIS, there's a process where you need to see, allied health professionals and get confirmation that that is the right product, et cetera, et cetera. So do you think that, like pre-NDIS, as you said, you didn't have that kind of support? You had to just buy it yourself, or you chose to buy it yourself because you were in that better position. Do you think that you might have made better or worse choices back then because you didn't have that second opinion from the OT? Like, did you go to an OT, for example, pre-NDIS and say, hey, I'm thinking about this kind of aid, what do you think? Or did you just figure it out yourself? What was the difference there?
No, I just did it myself.
Yeah?
So, yeah. Just, and I suppose that's where the technical know-how of, my mechanical mind works came into play as well, of knowing sort of what equipment I did need. And, I knew with my journey that I'd eventually end up in a wheelchair, just the way it was panning out. So I was sort of preparing for that. So I already had that mindset. So I suppose I'd already done a lot of the due diligence, so to speak, to work out then what I was going to need for the future. So
yeah, okay.
And I think that's where my journey is a lot different to someone who has a spinal cord injury, where in a matter of seconds their world is turned upside down, and all of a sudden they've got to get their head around, well, am I still going to be able to drive? Can I still work? How am I going to travel? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? So whereas I had probably time on my side to evaluate all that stuff.
But then when you said you went through those kind of 8 to 10 year points, did you find that they were a struggle to get through those periods because it was you were learning new stuff? Like, what was that period like?
Yeah, it was tough because during my whole life, I've really sort of pushed the boundaries on, where I continued to walk right up until the death knock, really, until I had to go into a wheelchair, and I just didn't want to give up. So. And I think, a lot of people with disability are fairly strong-minded like that, in that they know what the challenges are ahead of them. And if you've got that inner strength to try and overcome that, but look, I'll admit, Ali, it was tough, particularly going into a wheelchair. Just like I had a young son at that time. He was only 12, and I was worried about sort of what he would think, what his friends would think. And there's always those first times, and I'm referring obviously now to the wheelchair, where your family sees you for the first time, your friends see you for the first time. They've only known you walking, and then all of a sudden you're in this wheelchair, which is my decision, my choice to make that. And obviously, I've been married a long time, so obviously I spoke to my wife about it and how it was going to affect her. But yeah, there was that mental anguish, I suppose, one of a better word. To make those decisions to, start using a wheelchair, start using hand controls, and I didn't want to think that I was giving into my disability, but I think I got to a stage where I just had to accept where I was and that I needed to make these changes. So
I've got a follow-up question for that. Did those changes then change your life? Did your world open up, or did it close down, or was it just a gradual change? What happened when you actually took that big step to wheelchair, hand controls, those type of things?
It was a major change forward. It was a positive change forward.
Yeah, right.
Because all those things that I gave up doing, which was playing sports and that, obviously because I wasn't mobile to do that, I then took it up in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. And that was the best thing for my mind, was to have done that. As far as driving was concerned, it was getting more challenging towards the end, because when I even had the test to decipher whether I needed to go to hand controls, where they sit you in front of that panel with all the lights and all that, and you've got pedals underneath the desk, and they test your reaction time to go from the accelerator to the brake. They said to me, look, you're still borderline. I said, that's enough for me to know that it's time. I said, I don't want to push the boundary anymore. I'm happy to go to hand controls now at this point. So
it's a good, one thing which I will praise you for, Brian, because I know you and we've spoken many times offline here as well, is you have a very good radar on making these kind of decisions. Whenever we've spoken about it, you seem to be pretty switched on about that stuff. I actually think you could be a good coach or a leader for some people in that respect, in helping them make the decisions, because it's a very difficult thing to make the decision, and you seem to be armed with good processes to make those decisions.
I appreciate that, Ali. Look, and I'm sure that helps my work here at Mobility Plus, in that, I'm dealing with people every day of the week with either, congenital health issues or disabilities by spinal cord injury, whatever the case may be. And you're right, we do become a bit of a coach and mentor to them, because if it's a new spinal cord injury and we're meeting them at Talbot at the rehabilitation hospital, they're still in their head spin about, what life looks like for them going forward. Whereas I can share obviously my experience and let them know that, I still drive, I still work full time, I still holiday. We've got a ski boat that we take away for family holidays. I drive that. I don't get behind it anymore, but my wife and son and all the family and friends do all that part of it, but I still drive it and I still participate in that way. So
yeah, boats are pure hand controls anyway, so it's good.
Exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned Mobility Plus, so let's have a chat there. Let's give your business a plug there. what is Mobility Plus for the people that aren't in Melbourne? Talk to us about Mobility Plus, or for the people who are in Victoria. Let us know what you're doing there.
All right. So Mobility Plus is a 40-year-old family business. Started by Danny O'Neill, 40 years ago. He's in a chair himself after a motorbike accident, and started building his own wheelchairs in his garage. And like most small business stories, starting his garage, then a bigger factory, then a much bigger factory, then a bigger factory. And here we are 40 years on, and our core business is still manufacturing custom, what we call day chairs, which are wheelchairs that people sit in every day, and also sports chairs as well. So we have an engineering facility here at our premises here in Fairfield in Victoria. And we custom build Australian-made, handmade wheelchairs.
Yeah.
So,
and I think Danny was really big in the wheelchair basketball scene as well. I remember you were saying, because we also had a Olympic wheelchair basketball on a couple of, she was an old school lady as well, Lisa Tesh, she's a politician. And she knew Danny actually from back in the day, because she was really promoting Australian-made wheelchairs as well.
Yep.
And we were sort of mentioned about Danny, and she said, yeah, because I remember you were saying he was part of the kind of origins of it, and she was part of the origins of the kind of the female wheelchair basketball, and they sort of knew each other through the boards and all of that. So yeah, it's and I know you guys do like all sorts of stuff, like vehicle mods and resell a lot of other products as well. So bit of an all-round kind of facility, one-stop shop type thing in Melbourne.
Yeah, it is very much, Ali, in that the business then evolved to doing vehicle mod work from all aspects of that to we've got a fairly big pediatric range as well. As I mentioned, the sports side of it, we do some recreational equipment in modified custom push bikes and trikes and things like that. So yeah, the range is quite diverse.
Well, speaking of the product, one thing I wanted to just quickly go back to with the hand controls that you were talking about. So the Monarch hand controls, just to clarify, you were using them first. They're just a standard push-pull, is that right? Like a manual push-pull style thing?
Not push-pull so much, but push to brake and pad down to accelerate.
That's the Monarch.
Yeah.
And then radial for people that
control
are listening, they might know it as a push radial hand control.
Yeah,
correct.
and then you said you've got now a e-radial. Is that the PME one?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And so how did you go about, I guess, selecting that product? What's the process that you go through, and what would you, I guess, recommend to your clients that come there when they're thinking about the different hand controls and products?
It's really just assessing both their physical abilities and capabilities, and also cognitively what works best for them as well. So obviously something that's not too complicated. Also, if they've previously been using a particular
Style.
Yep. That they may want to stay with that same style, which was my reasoning for going still with the e-radial, because I was just so used to that push down for brake and pad down to accelerate, but I just wanted an electronic version of that, so I stayed with that. But as you will know, there's a dozen or more different styles out there that you can go with, from using your left hand to using your right hand to something that's just in the palm of your hand, to something that's mounted on the steering wheel itself. It just comes back to the individual's physical needs and cognitively what they can manage as well. So, did
you sort of have it predetermined in your mind that that's what you wanted, or did you try a couple of different things as well when you were back on the market for it, or did you go, you know what, I just want the electronic version of that, I know what I'm used to?
No, I did try a couple of different options, because in the vehicles we've got here at Mobility Plus, they're fitted out with a couple of different options. One's a Kiwi one, which is just a thumb operated one. We also had another style which was like a motorbike accelerator, so a twist grip. I had a try of that. What did I try? Yeah, there was one or two others I had a look at as well, but I kept coming back to the e-radial. That worked just well for me.
Yeah, one thing which is mentioned here, one thing which is mentioned in a lot of the other people that we've spoken about with the hand controls is other sensors tend to kick in as well and start to build up over time. So like you maybe you like once you get used to one particular style, the other senses of your body have also become used to that particular style, and you may not realize that. So it becomes very difficult to retrain the entire thing. So if you need to.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
So at Mobility Plus there as well, so you're doing the custom wheelchair. So you're doing fitting of bits and pieces for cars as well?
Yep. So I'm not personally involved with that. My role here is national sales. So I've got a team underneath me that look after various product groups. And we've got Glenn here who oversees the vehicle modification division. So,
and how big do you go with the vehicle modifications so people can learn more about it? Is it installation of hand controls, which you've spoken about, but ramps, vans, cut floors? How far does it go there at Mobility Plus?
Yeah, we don't lower floors. We haven't gone to that stage. We do the rear tub conversions with caddies and things of that nature, but not a full van fit out where you're lowering the floor by 12 inches or whatever the case may be. So we tend to work more with vehicles that have already got that floor to ceiling height reg that we need to either put a tourney seat into or a six-way seat into or something like that. So F6 lifts we do quite a lot of. So we do quite a lot of lifts into vans. We do a lot of Carol lift 40s, which is a device that goes in the rear of the vehicle and will lift up a piece of equipment. So in my case, it's my wheelchair that it lifts up. Because I can still stand and I can walk around to the driver's door.
That was going to be my next question. You've been talking about wheelchair and hand controls. It doesn't mean that you need to load the wheelchair across your body for every case. So if in your case, you're walking to the rear of the car?
Yep. So I'm very fortunate in that I'm still what they call a standing para. So I can stand out of my wheelchair, and I was lifting it in and out for a number of years there. But as I'm getting older, the muscles on that aren't what they used to be. So hence why I went to the Carol lift 40 and put that into the back of my Commodore wagon. So
Brian, how do you open your boot?
While I'm still sitting in the wheelchair, I just reach out to the latch, open it up. So unfortunately with the Commodore wagons, they don't come standard with auto boot openers, but you can get the aftermarket version. So
you haven't got the aftermarket version?
No, not at this point. No. So yeah.
And then do you use the little rails across the top of the car to help you with your balance?
I still use a walking stick, so I balance myself with a walking stick, and then my left hand will be just on the car itself, like holding onto the back door handle until I get to the front, or as you said, up onto the top roof rack area. So
no, it's good to hear, and that's why we asked for other people when they're listening to this, they might be thinking about their own function. So yeah, all of those type of scenarios are plausible if you've got that ability to stand and mobilize. We've actually had another client actually put a rail with roof bars, so roof racks, and then we've attached a bar to that to actually help him with his balance moving down the side of the car. So there's lots of things to explore there if you've got partial walking mobility.
Sure. And I not only use the Carol lift to get my wheelchair, and I also use it to I've got what I call a tri-ride power assist device, and that fits on the very front of my manual wheelchair and turns it into a motorbike, for want of a better word. And I'll use the Carol lift to lift that in and out as well. So, and I can do that while I'm sitting in my wheelchair. I can pull up to the back of my car, while I'm still sitting in the wheelchair, I can lower the cable down, attach it to the tri-ride and lift it up while I'm still sitting in the wheelchair. So it can be used for a number of different devices.
And that's a Commodore wagon you've got?
Yeah, it is.
The Holden wagon. Yeah, they've been a fantastic car, and we worry about the future in regards to station wagons for people that need that style of car, because there's reducing number of station wagons on the market nowadays.
Yeah, sure.
And the Commodore wagon seems to be a bloody good car for our disability industry. So many products can go in and out of it really, really easily. We've had a lot of success with a lot of products with those cars. So yeah, it is a bit of a shame that they're going, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's the beauty of the Carol lift too, is that I'm able to transfer that then from this vehicle to the next one. So Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that's in general, we've mentioned it before. A lot of the good things about not cutting your vehicle when you modify is that you can take those products with you from vehicle to vehicle. And then also it could be easier to get funding or justify it on maybe an older car if you can justify that, hey, I can take this with me and the car is not going to hold it back type thing. So we always recommend that as well.
Sure. Now, Brian, I've got one more question from an OT point of view. Do you use a spinner knob?
Yes, I do.
Yep, on the left-hand side of the steering wheel?
Yes, it is.
Yep. And where do you place your spinner knob? Is it up at that 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock region, or a little bit higher up at 11 o'clock? If you think of your steering wheel as a clock, whereabouts do you place your spinner knob?
It'll be at 10.
At 10?
So,
yep.
Yeah.
So it's an OT thing that we discuss a lot of, and we know there's a bunch of clients out there that prefer not to have a spinner knob on there. So it's good to hear that you do have one on there.
Yeah, and my personal choice is to use it, particularly for tight turns, for getting in and out of car spots and things like that, where you just need to be really able to turn that wheel fairly quickly, or if it's a fairly sharp left-hand turn that you're doing. I just feel I've got more control over the steering wheel rather than just sort of palming it, using the palm of my hand to spin it around.
Yeah, okay. Right. Sounds good. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
We might have to start wrapping it up, hey?
Yeah,
sure.
Well, Brian, we've got one question that we ask everybody at the end of each of our interviews. And, you know, cars get us from A to B. And we've explored a lot about how a car is important to you and your license journey and so forth. But what's one thing that you've used your car that might be a little bit unique? What have you used your car that might be a little bit unique, or something that other people don't know? What do you use your vehicle for that is more than getting from A to B?
I suppose the recreation side of it, as I mentioned, of having a boat and being able to tow that behind the car to get to family holidays and things like that. Obviously, I use it a lot, not only to commute to and from for work, but also to get my sport for sports as well. So I play 3 different wheelchair sports, and I'm able to get everything in the back of the car that I need to get to those sporting events. So,
so what do you play, Brian? We've mentioned it lots of times. What sports do you play?
Wheelchair, tennis, badminton, and I'm involved in wheelchair AFL as well. So I've played for a number of years, but I've stopped playing and I've taken on a coaching role for the Collingwood club. So,
I've heard, is AFL the same? I was speaking to a wheelchair rugby guy and they sound pretty aggressive. They throw you out of the chair, and is the same with AFL?
Yeah, it is fairly, it's fairly contact, maybe not as aggressive as rugby, but it's still a fairly contact sport. So
they're throwing people out of chairs left, right, and centre over at rugby, and I'm just like, wow. So it's full on. That sounds really good, and yeah, thanks very much, Brian. That's been really good, really awesome to talk to you.
My pleasure, Ali. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, really appreciate it. As we wind up this episode, Brian went through lots of trials, but as we say in every episode, if you've got any queries about what you can do and what will work for you, make sure you do get in contact with your local OT or mobility dealer, such as Mobility Plus, and set yourself up with the trials, because as we say, trials really do put you in the driver's seat. And on that note, thanks very much, Brian, and we'll see you all in the next podcast.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Ali.
All right, everybody. That wraps up the session with Brian. Brian was a fantastic guy. And what we're doing now is, based on feedback, we're doing our little wrap-up sessions at the end of the podcast, so it all stays together as one. So that's what we're moving into now, is our little wrap-up session of our discussion with Brian, where Ali and I dig a little bit deeper and go into the little bit of the backstory from a technical point of view. What did you think, Ali, of that interview with Brian?
I thought it was awesome. I really like Brian, and I love the way that he processes everything, the way that he explains everything. As he said, I think the fact that he was born with the condition maybe makes it a little bit easier from a mental point of view to process these things. But yeah, look, one of the big key things was really how he made those decisions at those various points in life. It wouldn't have been easy. And as he said, it was mental anguish, because to me, at each point of those 8 to 10 year cycles, it's almost like he would have been a new disability almost, So you would have to still process that. But the way he processes things, I really encourage people to listen to that and really understand that, because he's a very sensible person. He's processing things in a very, very sensible manner, but he's still going through and living through these things in life. So I thought it was really good.
Yeah, he's mentioned that he's got spina bifida, but it was an evolving process as he has growth spurts and as scar tissue changed and so forth. Reminded me very much of the interview that we did with Nev, and the MS story that he had with that degenerative condition. We don't know if Brian's condition is going to change too much into the future. I'm not sure if he knows whether it's going to change too much into the future or not, but that evolving story compared to having an injury like a spinal cord injury, and then the next day it's different. This is an evolution of function and a change in function as time goes by. And I think it really is an interesting story and an interesting thing to explore more with clients in regards to how do they know when it's time to move on to the next product or the next thing. And Brian was saying that he could feel that those pedals were getting to a stage where he changed the pedal, built the pedal out, which is something that can be done. It should go through engineering and making sure that that's a safe build out and consideration for other people that drive the car, but building out that accelerator so it's the same level as the brake pedal. But when it was at time then to move from the AFO and pedals being built out to hand controls. And I think we can do assessments and so forth. And he said he had an assessment to say that his foot was borderline. The reaction times were borderline, but he was in a mental mindset to say, I don't want to be borderline. I want to be excellent, and made the decision to move over to hand controls.
Yeah, I thought that was really good and very, I guess, reminded me of what Neville was saying. He also had said a similar kind of thing, that he probably could have been okay. But just that element of risk to the community kind of was, they felt a higher responsibility. And that was also, I guess, similar kind of message I got from Brian as well. He didn't want to take those risks, even though they said, yeah, look, you should be okay. And that, I guess, also, which is something that we've covered a little bit, which is more and more of what's going to be, I think, the next discussion over the next probably 5 to 10 years is those lines of what's going to be okay and what's not going to be okay is going to be tested by the governments. And it does require us to take those responsibilities for ourselves as well, and speak up when we don't think it's okay or we do think it's okay, because it does seem to be, with all the stuff on highlight, as we've discussed in a few of the episodes. It is like he said, the person tested him and goes, oh yeah, you should be okay. But I think nowadays you'll find the criteria might start to get a lot more stringent over time,
Yeah, I think that'll be the case as well. I think we're always going to push those boundaries with new technology that comes in, new training mechanisms, new rehab sessions and so forth. Even like he said, spina bifida isn't as common nowadays because of the folate that the mums are taking in the first trimester. I mean, that's wonderful news in regards to an evolution of a condition. But even with strokes as an example, there's many more people surviving strokes with complex needs based upon that survival compared to many years ago. People would have passed away. It's going to be an evolving space as medical practices get better, rehab gets better, and also there's more technology on the market. Those boundaries are going to continue to get pushed.
Yeah. And on that technology, one thing I'll mention, I guess, highlight, which I thought Brian really does, I guess, represent well, is the usage of aids and technology to ensure that you can then do other things in your life and have longevity in your body. So when you heard Brian explain, I guess, the various aids he needed and the points in time in which he got those aids and decided to get them and so on. And I know that I've spoken to him about other stuff, like he's got a smart drive on his wheelchair that he doesn't really, I guess a lot of people may consider he wouldn't need it. But when I've asked him about
front wheel too, doesn't he?
Yeah, like that motorbike front wheelchair thing he was talking about, like you could see he's a fairly athletic guy and he does 3 different types of wheelchair sports. So a lot of people might say, why would you even put that there? And I've actually asked him that question, and his feedback was, well, I get all my physical activity through the sports and I want to do them. So when I'm not doing them, I'm going to save my body from that repetitive action. So he's very, very considered in that respect in terms of using aids. And I think that's a really, really big kudos to him and something that people could get inspiration from.
Well, think about the mental health side of that as well, is that, the enjoyment, the satisfaction that he gets out of those wheelchair sports. And if he can't do that because he's fatigued from pushing around his chair all day for all the work that he has to do to and from clients, in and out of hospitals, demonstrating wheelchairs and so forth, and the sales team and managing his team. If he gets to the end of the day and his shoulders, arms are fatigued and he can't play his wheelchair sports, what does that do to his mental health? So these additional products to help prolong shoulder health are really important from multiple levels.
And the last thing which I'll I guess really highlight was one thing again Brian mentioned was he's been using a particular type of hand control for X number of years, at least 10 plus years. I don't know how many clients I've had that have come here that have used that hand control for 10 plus years and their mind is closed to anything else. They just want the exact same thing. And Brian ended up with a very similar thing to the exact same thing, but he still went out and tried different things. And I thought that's a big kudos to him, that at his age and at his kind of, level, where a lot of people, to be honest, overwhelmingly, most clients that would present to our workshop, like Brian, I can guarantee you most of them, the first thing that would say is, give me what I had. They wouldn't even entertain trying something different. So it goes back to the big theme of what we try and push is keep trialing things. And this guy here is a great, inspiration to that, because a testament to that, because he's been using one particular control the whole time. And I guess one thing is he works in the industry, so he can tell that he can see the every day how much these things are better and can be different and evolve, so it's great that he got back out there and just started trying different things.
Absolutely 100% agree. Trials, I mean, we spruik it we talk about it every week. Trials really do put you in the best position, so get out there and trial things. Make sure that you're following your state law in regards to what's required by the Department of Transport, Vic Roads, RMS, Queensland Department of Transport, wherever you are around Australia. Make sure that you do understand what the licensing requirements are. I'm not sure how he went for so long without having anything on his license, whether that's just an evolution of the Vic Roads over there, or whether he slipped under the radar. We're not to know, but I'm glad that he's
it's just an evolution.
I think
it's the same in New South Wales. There's a lot of people here that just got their license back in the old days. There's nothing written on there.
Nothing written. No, no, that's right.
No one really knew how to process it, and as we've discussed, they're just trying to figure that out now.
Yeah, absolutely. So many clients of ours come for an assessment and their license is suspect to what they've actually been driving with over the last little bit. So make sure you keep that up to date. There is actually, in South Australia, I can talk about that. There is actually something when you go to sit for your license or when you fill out your paperwork, do you have a medical condition that impacts on driving? And it's a yes/no box, and then you fill in the details after. Make sure you fill that in when you update your license in South Australia, and I'm pretty sure it's the same with the RMS as well. So it is a responsibility of the client, the person that holds the license, to notify the Department of Transport.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that's it.
I like that one. That was good. And we'll catch up with Brian sometime in the future.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, guys. Well, until the next time.
Yeah, thanks very much for tuning in. And like we say, set yourself up with trials. But If you like this, make sure that you go and like it on our socials, or press the like button or the subscribe button on the channel that you're listening to this on. And if you think that it's going to be beneficial for somebody else to start listening to, maybe you know somebody that is contemplating hand controls, or maybe they need some mobility advice for getting out into the community, make sure you share this with them and spread the word. All right.
Sounds good.
See you next week, Ali.
All right. See you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Drive Able podcast with Brad Williams and Ali Akbarian. If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate, and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @Drive Able Podcast for more information.